Right, well, here we are. Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Lynett, and today we're going to talk over coffee or tea or whatever beverage you may choose to have, if any, about how to deal with frustrating people. And I don't know whether I could say that I'm coming at this subject as an expert or if I'm more clueless than you on the matter, or somewhere in between. But this seems to be an element of life that is important to get right, and so at least I'm going to try. At least I'm going to try to bring up a few things that are helpful. And I really do mean try. Today, I think the thought that we should bear in mind is that of a thimble. Normally you don't see me using too many objects like this in CSC, especially not over morning coffee, but I think that it's important to think about a thimble. Now, why did I put a thimble up here? It's to remind us of how in certain aspects we can get filled to the brim easily. And you may say, well, what if I'm not a thimble, right? What if I'm a larger cup than that? What if I'm a larger cup? Well, that you may be, but in that case, the thimble's even more important. Because you can never expect, you can never expect other people to respond the same to circumstances as you do. You can never expect someone else to respond the same. And if you do find somebody who can respond the same, well, you have found it's just rare. Because you have, in a way, self-selected for the circumstances in your life based upon your previous decisions. And your previous decisions have been based largely upon your own preferences. So if you're constantly making little decisions to respond to things in accordance with your preferences, you've established a particular way that people in the world interact with you. You've established a system of things that you do tolerate. And other people have, by their choices, and which are predicated on their preferences, established other systems of how to deal with the world. Now, granted, we certainly have more that is similar to one another than we do have differences, but the differences are enough that they make a big difference. That is to say that the things that I might find easy to deal with, you might find difficult. And the things that you might find easy to deal with, I might find difficult. And the things that we might find easy to deal with, somebody else might find difficult. So, just imagine people as thimbles filled to overflowing with their problems. And if they're not thimbles filled to overflowing with their problems, they're cups filled to overflowing with their problems. And if they're not cups filled to overflowing with their problems, they are oceans filled to overflowing with their problems. Now, you may see yourself as a cup or as an ocean, but if we just go through life with the basic understanding that everyone else that we've ever encountered is a thimble in at least some aspect, and that we are too. Because I know there are certain things, certain triggers that I am much more susceptible to having push me over the edge. And in those aspects, I'm emotionally immature. Just like I'm sure you and everyone else in the world has similar things that can push them over the edge. We all are thimbles, which would have us then think, well, okay, what's the scenario here? What's the scenario? If everyone is filled to overflowing with petty problems, that if we look at our neurobiology, will ultimately wind up hijacking our emotions and rendering us incompetent and incapable compared to what it is that we could be, well, that just means everyone's struggling. Everyone is struggling to the measure that they can struggle, usually. Now, we have this thing that as human beings, yeah, we might not want to push ourselves beyond our limits, but we function very close to the edges of whatever our limits are. And if we pull back, our limits often pull back. That's why I advocate constantly trying to stay a little bit past the edge of what it is we perceive that we can do, and constantly broaden our limits. But I've noticed that in myself, because I have that expectation of myself, I also have that expectation of others. And when other people don't do that, I fail to see how day after day, month after month, year after year, they wind up succumbing to the same kinds of petty problems that I got over at some point. And I realized, well, I got over them because I conscientiously set out to do that. It was a part of either my growing up or a part of my deciding, look, this isn't productive for me. I can't hold on to these certain things. Let's see what happens if we push ourselves past this point and try to transcend them. And so that's what I've done, and I just kind of assumed that everybody would do that, assuming that they cared about themselves. But lots of people aren't present enough or cognizant enough, or lots of people don't care enough to even do that. And if lots of people don't care enough to do that, that means that they'll wind up staying a thimble their whole life, unless something else would be done about it. And if they're going to stay a thimble their whole life, then little bits of chaos will remain difficult for them to deal with, and they'll just be waiting for somebody else to lighten the burden. I mean, that's one reason that people tend to be okay with authoritarian systems, for example. People can be okay with authoritarian systems because they perceive that whatever problem they have on their plate, if the authority promises to help them with it, life will get better. They don't realize that if the authority goes and helps with the problem, there will be other downstream effects and other problems that they're just going to wind up having to deal with instead. And so they wind up giving up a lot of their autonomy to other people that may or may not actually care about them in order to make their lives better. I mean, that's just one way this manifests itself. Another way it manifests itself is that sometimes people just want to go and dump their problems on whoever has the patience or the misfortune to listen, right? And at least I've noticed that the little gnats, the little flies, the little mosquitoes, the little thimbles full of problems tend to annoy me way more than the big ones. Because if somebody's struggling with something big, I find it easier to understand it. But if somebody's struggling with something small, um, I find it very difficult to be empathetic. I find it very difficult to be empathetic. And, well, if you see people struggling with these things and constantly trying to pour crap down the backs of other people, it may just be because they have reached their limits. And that is, I suppose, the first point I'm trying to make here. Is that we are constantly dealing with people that are pressed to their emotional limits. And if we don't conduct ourselves accordingly, we're shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to whatever it is that we care about. Now, why is this person trying to sabotage me? We could ask, okay, why is this person behaving hatefully toward me? Why is this person being frustrating? All of these are legitimate questions to be asked, and the answer often isn't that they're somehow going out of their way to be miserable, but they could conceivably just be weak. And in being weak, well, they might just need someone to lighten the load. They might just need someone to lighten the load. The golden fleece of self-satisfaction protects against blows but not against pinpricks. APT, and no, I'm not talking about the Linux package manager. I'm talking about that what you said is apt. Anyhow, if we bear in mind that other people are struggling, it may make our interactions more easy. Furthermore, they might not only be pushed to their limits, but they may not have the tools to deal with the situation that they're in. I have always been, from the time I can remember, a reader. And my situation might be a little extreme. My situation might be a little extreme because I've been reading since before I was a year old. So that was kind of my default modus operandi. If I run into a problem, the first thing I try to do is I research it. I learn as much about it as I can. And then after learning, I formulate a plan and conduct myself accordingly. Which I guess will let you know that I'm stupid because I've still been struggling with this, dealing with frustrating people for altogether way too long. Right? I haven't formulated and followed through with a plan that helps me as much as I should be helped. But either way, I've been reading for essentially my whole life. And because that's my natural way of dealing with things, I would assume that other people would be able to find similar resources to what it is that I have and just read them and internalize them and do what would be reasonable to expect them to do after having read something and wanting to make their life easier. Well, that might not be the case, right? People might not be competent to do either what it is that you would want them to do or what it is that they would want to do. They could be running around life, butting their heads up against the same frustrations day after day and week after week and month after month and year after year without making any headway because they aren't the person that they need to be in order to get where they want to be, in order to have the life they want to have. And so, expecting people to have their stuff together, to have their excrement together, might be unreasonable. Expecting people to have their stuff together and be competent enough to deal with it, that might also be unreasonable. So not only are they pushed to their limits, but they don't have the tools that it takes to expand their limits to essentially fit their tasks. And a lot of that comes with struggling. Learning happens through struggle. But then also, if we see someone struggling with something and that person happens to be part of our life, if we approach them with the understanding that they are hurting, we are both empathetic and sympathetic with that person. We might find that we turn a saboteur or a frustrating person into an ally. And if we make our expectations of the interactions clear, we might be able to be the catalysts for forming win-win situations that didn't exist previously. Which brings to another point that, okay, have I actually made my expectations for this interaction clear? Because my expectations for many interactions are, well, uncommon. I personally expect people to be well-mannered. But why am I well-mannered? Well, I'm well-mannered for at least a few reasons. I'm well-mannered in most circumstances, and obviously I'm sure that all of you can go and find exceptions to the rules, but I value manners because, number one, my grandmother was very picky about these things. She insisted that everybody treat everybody else with respect. In her presence, there was no other option. Respect was the order of the day. She had a lovely book of manners up in her attic, which I read. I wish I could remember the name of it. But I read it from cover to cover and decided to act accordingly. Because I figure, this is a book, it is a manual for how to respect other people. And I noticed that people responded very positively to that. Because it was actions combined with the attitude of caring and respecting. And so on. And when doing that, something happened. It happened probably around the time I was 16 or 17. It was about the time I was 16 or 17 when things... throughout the course of my teenage years, things went from very good to horrible, and then they improved a bit, and then they went from okay to bad to worse. And a lot of what like I have to take responsibility for what I can take responsibility for, and I would say that actually a big portion of why things went so badly for me beginning in my later teens was because I started having different expectations of people than I had before then. I started having different expectations of other people. Before then, I would explain things multiple times and in great detail. And I would be more open with what my expectations were because I assumed that other people didn't know my expectations for whatever the interaction might be. And people knew under what terms they could and could not interact with me. And they knew the terms that I would be willing to help them. They knew all these different things, and I was effective in my interpersonal interactions. But then there got to be this point where I'm like, well, okay, I'm dealing with older, more mature people. Surely they would have a better time figuring out what's going on, and so I would spend less and less and less time explaining myself. Probably because I had gone and spent so much time explaining myself in all these little things earlier that I figure, well, you know, uh, people might know better. You know, if I'm having a struggle in my life and I say something about it once to somebody else, I wrongly, I suppose, have this expectation that they would take it into account because I tend to remember when other people go and tell me their problems. And because I tend to remember when other people tell me their problems, and I think about, okay, what is it that I can do in order to be here for this person? I think, well, I have told my problems, and these people aren't doing the same thing that I would be doing for them. These people aren't doing the same thing I would be doing for them. And that annoys me. In fact, I find that to be quite hurtful because I go out of my way to be the person that other people need me to be. But then it doesn't necessarily occur to me that maybe they haven't adopted the same attitude of dealing with other people. Of dealing with other people. And so, even though I might consider it, it feels to me to be patronizing people to repeat myself. Some people do crave structure and repetition, and redundancy isn't necessarily a bad thing. And it's possible to repeat yourself and to multiple times over multiple years in multiple ways say what it is that you need without without hurting other people. And if they say that you're being burdensome, well, then maybe they're not the people that you should be spending time with anyway. Because at least in terms of friendship, it's a two-way road. I mean, like, it's not always one person giving and it's not always one person receiving. There's give and there's take. And we're constantly defining and redefining through our actions and our words what these terms are. But if we go and expect people to remember something that we said 2 years ago, or something that we said 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, or even 2 or 3 weeks ago, it might not be reasonable to expect everybody to remember that. In other words, that would be the exception rather than the rule. And even with exceptional people, there are times when their life is so bad, their life is so difficult, that they might not remember all the details that you went and told them at some point. And so reminders are necessary. For those of you who are efficient people or people that crave efficiency, I would call that being efficiently inefficient. Efficiently inefficient, specifically meaning that you are inefficient, you are repetitive, you're doing all these other different things that you don't see would be necessary if you were programming a computer, for instance, in dealing with other human beings. And then you go out of your way to constantly do that, constantly communicate your expectations, constantly be there for other people, constantly be empathetic, constantly be sympathetic. Do all these different things that you need to do. Develop yourself into the kind of person that deals well with this. And to some extent that means being adaptable, but to another extent it means just being able to engage in open and honest conversation in two ways, in such a way as you're respecting the other person. So even when you do repeat yourself, there are nice ways of doing it. And you don't need to be passive aggressive and say, well, as I said last week. You can just say, well, I hope that I'm not, I really hope I'm not patronizing you here. And I'm definitely not trying to. But right now, I need this out of you. And it's very vulnerable to be able to go and say, I need this out of you. And it's vulnerable simply because people can say no. People can say, I'm not in a position to do that. People can go and tell you to screw off. There's a gigantic spectrum of responses. And sometimes it's better to deal, or easier anyhow, to deal with the certainty of not getting a response from them and being able to whine about it than it is the uncertainty of struggling with what that response might be and modulating our own behaviors in order to get what we need, as well as to give others what they need. And I'll take a little detour here. Letting other people know that they have the power of veto. Letting other people know that they can go and change the terms. Or if something is wrong, that they can put the brakes on and be like, okay, no. I need some more time with this. That's important. That's very, very important. Because you still can't take people out of the driver's seat of their own lives. Especially when it comes to interpersonal interactions, because these things are inherently messy. These things are inherently messy. So if you have particular expectations and you go through this whole process, well, this process might change from time to time. And just be open and ready and willing to deal with it in a gracious way and have other people realize or attempt to establish within yourself the character that make other people feel safe going through this whole relationship troubleshooting problem solving thing, in order that everyone can wind up getting what they want and need, if at all possible. And still, there are going to be these circumstances where things just go wrong. There are going to be these circumstances where we can't do anything about it. It just ain't gonna work out. And still, we could have done all the right things. But life is full of uncertainty, and so being able to detach ourselves from the results and say, well, at least I tried, at least I gave it my best, and be at peace with that is an important skill to have. Caleb asks, what constitutes success in dealing with the frustrating? Well, that's a little tricky, isn't it? Because I think, we have our own emotional needs, and they're all pretty um, simple. And at the risk of being completely redundant and weird and so on, I'm just going to put a little picture up and say that, well, as we go through life, obviously we are selfish. Mostly everyone is selfish. We have our needs. We have our physiological needs. We have our safety needs. We have needs for belongingness and love. We have needs for... there we are. Stream interrupted. We have our physiological needs, safety needs, belongingness and love needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization needs. From bottom to top, many people's physiological needs are met. But interestingly, sometimes they're not. Now, why could that be? Part of it has to do with the fact that here in the Western world especially, many of us eat crap. Many of us eat crap. Many of us don't sleep enough. Many of us are uncomfortable. And almost everybody runs around being dehydrated. So this might be seemingly oversimple, but a lot of the problems that we run into can be avoided by making sure the physiological needs of other people and ourselves are taken care of. And if we understand that, okay, well, I'm having trouble with this because I'm not well rested. Certainly, there's a certain way that you can continually push yourself to being better and better and better in terms of being high functioning with low sleep. But over the course of a lifetime, that's not necessarily the best thing. So if you're... I'm sorry, I'll give Caleb's question a short answer first. Success in dealing with the frustrating is making sure that you have your needs met, and everyone else in the circumstance also has their needs met. And now we'll talk about meeting those needs. So if we go back to our little hierarchy pyramid thingy, which, yeah, it's interesting because these needs for food, water, warmth, and rest, or in the case that you're in the desert, perhaps being able to cool off a little bit too, are crucial. And sometimes there's even learning to take place here. Because, okay, let's say somebody is used to having a diet of what is objectively horrible food. Let's say somebody eats hundreds of grams of sugar every day, is addicted to sugar, is addicted to caffeine, is addicted to nicotine, is addicted to alcohol. Basically, he does nothing but it, look. This is an extreme case, right? But let's just say that he has unhealthy habits. Getting that turned around and right is difficult. That is incredibly difficult to do because you can't feed him what he's craving. And so he's going to be miserable no matter what until he winds up getting everything reset. You know, one thing that really helps many people to get their own stuff under control is to fast. Right. More recent research has shown that what we eat actually determines what we will eat because it determines what we crave because of the chemical signaling of the bacteria in our guts. The bacteria that we feed sends signals that cause us to crave more of what it is that they will eat. And if that would be bad for you things, well, too bad, because the bacteria will crave it. So sometimes what you need to do is just fast. Just 4 to 7 days, just don't eat anything. Drink plenty of water, maybe coffee, and that's it. Okay, so this might seem extreme in this self-indulgent society that we're in, but fasting can be very, very helpful. But how in the world do you convince someone to fast? Well, you don't. But you can do certain things like have with you boiled eggs, right? And then have something nice and tasty to go along with it. You know, carry a little brown bag around or have it in a refrigerator or something. Another thing you can do is insist that if you're meeting with somebody, that it be with some sort of food present. And make sure that you know what the snacks are. You know, like you have a veggie tray with some sour cream and onion dip or something. Then you're not going to be feeding anything bad. It's going to be fiber, water, fat, and a little bit of onion for taste, right? Which is fiber and water. So you can set these parameters. You can work on establishing the right kind of environment to have the physiological needs fulfilled. That can even go to having warm beverages around. Okay, then we can move up to safety needs. You can make sure that people feel safe around you. How do you do that? By not being threatening. That doesn't mean that you somehow have to curl into a little ball. Quite the opposite. You can be very, very strong and have people realize, hey, I can rely on this person. This person is going to be stable. This person, and oftentimes that will mean they'll pour even more crap down the back of your neck because they trust you. And that is why having your own safety and security in that sense, obviously, when it comes to the evolutionary biological aspect of it, we perceive threats in ways that aren't necessarily the best to us, that are more suited for hunter-gatherer lifestyles. But that we need to go and establish some environment of security and safety. And I know my wife and I had this goal that our house would always be a safe place for other people to show up. And I don't mean any of these BS safe spaces. I mean places where people can go and be real. And I've noticed that at least on an interpersonal level, people do feel safe coming over. People do feel safe coming over. Why? Interestingly, it's because we do our best to fulfill need number 3, both first and foremost in our own family, and secondly with other people that interact with us. The saying goes, the best way to get a friend is to be a friend. And friendship is interesting in terms of the transactional analysis that you can do. Right? And of course, here I am trying to analyze things in terms of interpersonal transactions, but that ultimately that's what it is. If we feel like the transactions are constantly slanted in such a way that doesn't favor us, which is very easy to do if we are ourselves emotionally mature, because we can take much more than other people can. What that means is if we want that to be sustainable and we don't want to have resentment, or we don't want to have these difficult things constantly piling up on us, we need to learn to train other people to do the same kind of a thing. And we do that by consistently reminding, as we were talking about earlier, these are my needs. These are my needs. This is what I need in a friend. And be patient. Right? A habit takes 3 weeks. And if you only see a friend a couple days a week, well, then expect it to take, say, 2/7 times 3 weeks, or whatever it might be. And that's with constant reinforcement. So you can say, hey, I'm going to open up here with you and say something that's a little difficult for me to say. I know we've been friends for a while, or I know we haven't been friends for too long, but there are some actual needs that I have. And there are needs that I need to have a friend fulfilling. They are whatever these needs are. And if you don't know what those needs are, well, then at least go about the process of trying to figure out. And you can say, well, I know that I need something, but I'm not sure what it is. Would you be willing to help? Would you be willing to be there? And if you have mutual goodwill, that person will be willing to help. But the training needs to take place. And if you're an intuitive type, where you just go and you see what's going on, and you kind of have at least a vague grasp and a very quick way of understanding. Ooh. I don't know, I guess this is the intuitive understanding thing. If you have a way of understanding situations that other people either don't have, or have so little experience using, or even more so, they might think, okay, or they might feel something, they might think or feel something, they might think, well, this can't possibly be the case, because they don't have the confidence. Any one of these things can conceivably go and throw a monkey wrench into your plans. They can go and throw a monkey wrench into the interpersonal interaction, because the other person won't have either the ability or the confidence to act on the ability to be the kind of friend that you need. And that is when gentle, repeated, loving, caring, respectful reminders help. We constantly train people how to interact with us by our actions and by the things we refuse to do. So we might as well be conscientious of that fact and train our friends to be our friends and to interact on terms that are mutually beneficial. So, these belongingness and love needs are definitely amongst those that can be trained. And I would say should be trained. Esteem needs are tricky, because on one hand, you can feel good about accomplishing things. The only way to actually feel good about something in any kind of a meaningful long-term fashion is to actually accomplish something. You can't go and fake that, because ultimately you know better. you can't completely delude yourself. And because you can't completely delude yourself, that actually means you need to be doing something real and productive and good. And it's interesting because this whole productivity thing, that's part of that's integral in the human experience. Being productive, being a winner, taking part in society in that sense, or in at least the minimum sense that you're doing something for yourself and for others, assuming other people are around. It's important. And for those of us that like to theorize, that means a lot of what we need to do revolves around being uncomfortable and moving from the theoretical to the practical. Going from theory to practice, especially when we don't have too much experience in practice, can be difficult. And encouraging other people who are generally theoretical to go into the practical in order to actually accomplish something. And no, I don't mean winning at Candy Crush. No, I don't mean playing video games. Those are substitutes. Right? People go and play video games because they can't or don't win in real life. You get the same biochemical response, pretty much, to winning at a video game as you do in real life, except for the fact that you know that win in a video game wasn't actually anything real. Unless you play professionally and that actually winds up putting food on the table or what have you. And so there are these habits, there are these things that ultimately divorce cause from effect and make getting that prestige and feeling of accomplishment either hollow if you get it in a wrong way, or not lasting because you're not continually being productive. You know, the people that sit on their laurels from a long time ago are miserable due to the fact that they haven't actually been doing anything except for way back when. You know, that's why people that do become a success either continue to be successful or mentor others. Because mentoring others allows them to have that same kind of the same kind of satisfaction. Because they can go and say, hey, by the way, something that I did a long time ago and found a way of articulating and changing and so on can be good for somebody else. So there you're accomplishing things in the lives of other people just on account of the person that you've gone and turned yourself into. And so you go from doer to sage. And both of those roles are important. And another thing you can do is calibrate this feeling of accomplishment. Calibrate your validation to the other person, right? If someone is having trouble doing the very basics of life, well then give them validation for doing the basics of life. If somebody has gotten past that point and has other things, we'll give them validation for doing the things that are right at that level of being hard but manageable. And so then you're going to wind up creating new neuronal connections. Then you're going to wind up helping them in improving themselves. Then you're going to wind up helping them deal with the problems that are on their plate, and they will be grateful to you for what you have done. Because you will be giving them real esteem. You're not going to be giving them a participation trophy. You're going to be saying, okay, think this is where you're at. This is your next one. And then pretty soon you can go and say, look at how far you've come. Look at how far you've come. And you can do that for yourself too. So dealing with frustrating people means getting all these things in order and being patient and then constantly remembering these things and remembering that other people have these needs too. And then the whole self-actualization thing is kind of built upon everything else. And more power to you if you can be self-actualized through your job. But the fact of the matter is, the reason they call it work is because it's work. But if you're able to then go about doing all these things, accomplishing all these things, because people can go and take pride in work that they don't like. I mean, I can hate going out and mowing the lawn and having my allergies bothering me, having snot dripping down my face, and I can still be happy that I got the lawn mowed. I can hate the pouring of the concrete, but I can be thankful that, oh, I have a new patio. Well, that's amazing. That's great. But then when it comes to my own goals, uh, it's nice to have those too. You can have those in the form of hobbies. You can have those in the form of pastimes, whatever you want to call it. Have a garden. If you want to be productive, have a garden. Then you can go and grow exactly what you want and then take care of the physiological needs through your self-actualization. Like just find a way of combining what you see as important in life and what you enjoy in life, and then you can get that tip of the pyramid taken care of. So you can do that for other people too. You can do that on behalf of other people. You can ask them questions about their goals and dreams in life. And if at all possible, you can associate yourself with those and help them reach those. I guess the big thing here is when dealing with these frustrating people, it will be an awful lot easier if you view them as co-participators in the human experience, to whatever extent they may, whether it be a thimble or whether it be an ocean. They are co-participators of the human experience. And you set yourself up as allies in as much as possible. And you can turn a frustrating person, an acquaintance, or even perhaps a saboteur, an unknowing saboteur, into a friend. And interestingly, enemies actually do make the best allies in the end because the dynamic between the two of you are different. If you wind up having somebody that has completely gone and just been bad, and you have been merciful to them, you have shown them undue kindness and favor, that person will be much more inclined to behave nicely towards you than somebody that you've allowed to walk over you. And there's a very subtle distinction. You can wind up having a friend that is very much using you. And you can wind up having an enemy that knows full well what you could have done to him that you didn't. And that all then boils down to our own character. What is it that we are known for? Our character is who we are, and our reputation is who other people think that we are. It's best if they are both exactly the same. And they will, over time, be the same, because living a lie is not, well, it's not good for anybody to do. Living a lie is not good. So basically you wind up having character and reputation matching each other over time. And if you make improvements in your own character, don't expect your reputation to change overnight either. People need to go and see, hey boy, this other person has really improved in his people skills. This other person has really improved in these different things. And then people need to learn to grow and trust you. People, whether they call themselves conservative or not, everyone is conservative because they want to conserve what works in their lives. And of course, you're willing to try new things in as much as you think it's going to get you what you want. So, the conclusion to this whole bit is that people are struggling. People don't necessarily have the tools to deal with their struggles. It is our responsibility to communicate clearly and effectively our needs. We need to understand this as a part of, or an area that we need to grow in. Because no matter how good we are, we can always get better. Because no matter how good we are, we're going to wind up getting frustrating circumstances commensurate with how good we are. Which means we'll actually be more frustrated the better we get, but also more satisfied. So therefore, it's worth it. And become attached enough to whatever it is that you're doing and understand it as a good in and of itself, so that even if things do wind up blowing up in your face, you're not so attached to the result that it winds up destroying you. And how do you do this whole being clear about your wants and your needs and character development and all these other different things, and being the right person that you need you to be, and being the person that the other person needs you to be? A good place to start is with the hierarchy of needs. And you just go through them in a systematic and educated fashion and make sure that they're met. Make sure that they're met in you, and make sure that they're met in other people. And if they're not, then take the steps that it takes to meet them. Take the steps that it takes to meet those needs. And yeah, that might mean that you're needing to research all sorts of new things about diet and exercise. Maybe it means that you're going to kick a bad habit. There are all sorts of different things that it could conceivably mean, and whatever it means for you is what it means for you. And I mean, people have been able to improve themselves for millennia. So it's not like this is some sort of an impossible task that only the elite can do. Anybody can make marginal improvements on where they're at, and little bit by 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 little bit. And it really helps if you keep a record of these things, so that you can go and see where you were at and where you are at, and then compare yourself last month to this month, or last year to this year, or today to 5 years from now, and see how far you've come. That will give you an immense sense of satisfaction. So, with all that said, we've been going for about an hour, and I promised we would go for about an hour, and I've run out of things to say. Next time we will talk about dealing with frustrating people, and unpackage things to make certain elements of this a little more clear, and give some tangible starting points if you're looking for something interesting. If you need to get a hold of me, you can at that email address. I put it into the chat box. And I do consulting about this sort of a thing. I mean, it's evolved over time. But still, I can't help but want to be able to give you what you want, to be able to help you get what you want in life. So, if you do want to have a conversation with me about this sort of a thing, hit me up, and we'll see what we can do. I really wish you all the best, and hope that what I've been able to provide in this past hour or so has been helpful. I'll put out a video next time, simply due to the fact that I don't want to impinge upon Mr. Caleb Beer's streaming tomorrow at this time. So, talk to you later. Goodbye.